This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer?
Experts in the Wire, episode 112. Martin Splitt.
Okay, ready?
Ready.
Great. So I'm sitting here with Martin Splitt at Tech SEO Boost in Boston. Martin, I first wanted to start by asking you, can you just explain your role at Google? From, I think, many of us in the SEO community, you sort of just arrived, like late last year and early this year. Explain your role and tell us if it was like a new role at Google and sort of how it fits in with the webmaster team.
Right. First things first, thanks for having me, Dan. It's great to be here in this podcast. So I arrived at Google in April last year, 2018. And I am a webmaster trends analyst, just like John and Gary and all the others are. The role is not different in any way. It's just that all of us are picking more or less the way that we want to approach this. And when I was in conversations with John and the team, I asked them, like, why do you need me? Because everyone is like super heavy on the SEO side, much more than I am. And I'm a web developer, so how do I fit into the picture? And that's pretty much the question you were asking. And the answer I was given was that web developers are getting more and more creative with their solutions they're building, and the entire web ecosystem is moving really fast. So it is good to look into it from a developer's perspective rather than an SEO perspective. And I believe that is very, very true, because from my own work in the space of being a web developer at smaller companies, at startups, at agencies, at large enterprises, I know that there has been a chasm between development and SEO. And sometimes you have like a really good work relationship between the two, and sometimes you have a really bad relationship between the two. And oftentimes these bad relationships are based on developers not understanding the value of SEO and search engines and organic search traffic, and SEOs not understanding how developers think and how the modern web ecosystem necessarily works. And I thought, if I can be the bridge for that gap, that would be fantastic. And that's the mission that I chose for myself, and where I get support from the team. And since then, I'm basically just like digging into rendering, indexing, and crawling mostly, but mostly rendering, really.
Yeah, and I'm curious, because I think sometimes when we see content being put out by Google by various teams, I'm sort of wondering where that comes from, where the ideas come from, and how that's all organized. So for example, I know there's like a YouTube creators channel that helps people understand YouTube, and they said in their channel, this is something we do after hours, we're doing it for the community. I'm curious, when we see all of your amazing JavaScript videos, like what sort of process goes into making those?
So we have a lot of freedom on choosing on how we approach the challenges. And the biggest challenge is, so our role in Webmaster Trends as Webmaster Trends analysts is to be a communication bridge between the internal development teams and the external world, as in like SEOs, developers, marketing people, whatever. And we see that obviously, as everything, Google search evolves as well. So we have things where we can improve stuff. We have things sometimes not exactly going to plan. And oftentimes it just works the way that you would expect. It just needs some more explanation. So we look at these things, and then it's like, if someone reports a problem, we're taking that internally to the respective teams and make sure that they understand what's going on. And if that is expected, then we need to like figure out why that is a surprise for everyone. Sometimes it also surprises us, and then we're like, okay, that makes sense. It's just like I've never looked at it from this perspective.
And do you mean someone external from Google, like like an SEO, somebody in the community?
Exactly. Like if you find something weird and you go through the public support channels and say like, hey, I don't know, like I noticed that none of the news sites gets indexed since like a few hours ago. Then we're going to be like, oh, interesting, let's double check. And then we check like if that's true. If it's true and affects everyone, then we might talk to the respective teams. So like we're basically trying to figure out where are issues and outages and problems. Luckily, these don't happen very often. Yeah. So most of the time what we do instead is the other way around. Internal teams build a new thing that the webmasters can do something about. So we figure out how to educate webmasters about this new opportunity and basically how to make that as easy as possible for them to work with.
Yeah.
So for instance, a team might go like, hey, we have this new API that lets you, I don't know, upload recipes so that they can be processed in a certain way. And then we're like, no, don't build a new thing. We have structured data for that. Making it easier for webmasters by just having one thing they need to do rather than 10 things they need to implement.
Right.
On the other hand, we also go like, oh, look, there's this new, I don't know, the new meta tags. We need to document this somehow. And then we write documentation, but documentation doesn't reach everyone. So we try to figure out how can we reach the people that we don't reach through documentation, because oftentimes we have lots of documentation that comes out. Just, I don't know, address something on the page and make it fade in and fade out. Then it's strategic which events we choose. And then I figured, so I basically like observed the developer communities, and I found that a lot of people don't know about the documentation.
Even developers?
Even developers,
wow.
Especially developers, because a lot of documentation historically has been written for SEOs and has not necessarily been helpful or technical enough for developers to use. And we're trying to change that.
I'm just smiling because even though it says developers.google.com, I think it's this.
But that's just a coincidence, because every kind of quote-unquote engineering documentation is hosted there. That's just like a hosting platform. It could also be docs.google.com. It just happens to be developers.google.com. But and if you look at like developers.google.com/web, you find a lot useful information for developers.
Yeah.
And they know about this. But if you accidentally stray into /search on developers.google.com, it looks a lot like there's nothing there for you.
Right.
It's not meant for you. So we're trying to like adjust that by offering additional documentation, not taking anything away, just adding more opportunities to like learn about how things work, and also meshing that with the documentation that already exists. Like for instance, I recently added something to the web components documentation so that people automatically build things right so that search can pick them up. Yeah, so that's that. And we found that a lot of developers learn from videos.
Yeah.
So I figured, let's try video, and it has been really successful so far, so we're probably going to continue working with that.
So your JavaScript video series, was that your idea to do that?
Yeah.
I'm always curious who comes up with this.
That was my idea.
Yeah, and I have to say personally, and I know speaking for many others, that video series really saved me in a few cases, especially working with some clients that are entirely on JavaScript frameworks. And not only was I able to brush up a little bit of my knowledge, but also share that with clients and say, look, this is Google, they're communicating to us how to actually do something. So I have to say personally, those videos have been very, very helpful.
Thank you, that's very nice to hear, because we're not hearing as much feedback.
Okay.
And sometimes that's scary, sometimes that's not helpful, because we are trying to like learn from the community what we need to do better or more of or less of. And I think so far everything that we've done to be as transparent as possible has been rewarded. Not with much feedback, but the bits, like we are basically hanging on to the bits and pieces we get, because that informs our strategy as well. So like if I'm looking at it, when I joined, I was like, okay, so what do we have in terms of documentation? So I sat down with our tech writer, Lizzie, she's amazing, fantastic to work with her, and said like, so what kind of documentation exists? And like, you're writing this documentation, right? And she's like, yeah. What do you think needs to be there? And I'm like, I don't even know what is there right now. And then we went through it, and then we had like a huge meeting last year to like discuss documentation strategy. And we figured, oh wow, we basically have nothing for developers besides the structured data bits and pieces. That is very implementation heavy, but there's nothing else there. So we decided, okay, we need something. Like if I can't, it doesn't scale me walking around telling every single web developer out there how it's done right. We need a better way to do that. And then we wrote a bunch of documentation. We wrote a code lab for people who try to be more like hands-on. The code lab hasn't gotten as much attention as I would like it to, but that just tells me that I'm not investing in code labs as much anymore. I'm just investing more in documentation and video content probably.
So one thing I want to do, I want to get to some actual technical and crawling questions.
Sure.
Real quick before we do that, if people want to give you feedback, where is the best place to go?
For feedback, it's definitely Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so everyone go to Twitter, and I'll put all the links in the show notes and everything at evolvingseo.com/wire. I wanted to chat about page speed. I had a couple of Twitter questions and a couple questions of my own on that. So Omar Ortiz has a question. He says, enterprise sites with dozens of marketing pixels, how much does it really affect page speed generally? How would you recommend maintaining and troubleshooting when you don't know who owns every pixel? His biggest fear is removing a piece of code that breaks something else.
So, okay. So from my own experience, I know exactly the situation that he's in because I know that especially like the non-technical teams are like, if we had this one more tool, this one more
like I have somebody adding Hotjar, and it's a nightmare.
It's like, oh, we have Google Analytics, but it doesn't give us what we want. So can we use like this other thing, and then we're gonna have the insights we need, and then you add it, and then they come back 2 weeks later. Yeah, we have these two things. They give us interesting information, but we need this other thing here, and can we integrate it with a CRM? And been there, done that. So the best strategy is to actually just like casually every now and then remove one and see if someone cries. If they don't, then that means that they have tried a tool and no longer use it and no longer care. If they come back and go like, so our data dropped off, then you're like, oh, okay, sorry for that. We're just gonna re-add it. Yeah. I mean, like that's like I'm obviously like exaggerating here, right? You shouldn't do that, but you should every now and then have a conversation. And if you have a feeling that they always say everything and they don't really do that, then also try to like have an honest, open conversation and ask them, can you show me how you use these tools? Right. And then you get a better feeling for what they are trying to accomplish, and maybe, just maybe, they don't need one of the tools, they just need to use one of the other, like the already existing tools in a more efficient way. That's all.
Yeah, I think what he's asking a little is, technically speaking, how would you diagnose and decide, like if you have 7 tools, how do you choose which one is really eating up the bandwidth? You know, you run Lighthouse in Chrome, or what? Is there any sort of test that you can?
I mean, web page test and Lighthouse probably tell you what's going on your page in terms of like how much bandwidth that eats for your users. Yeah. For Google search, it usually doesn't matter as much because we skip most of them.
Okay.
We just not fetch them.
Yeah.
Which also means that you need to be, when you're doing some custom stuff with, let's say, analytics or any of the other trackers or third-party scripts, you need to be defensive about it, as it's like, what if this doesn't load? A bunch of people just ignore that. They're like, no, we're loading analytics and then we can use it. I'm like, yeah, maybe not.
When you say Google skips it, is that for what's calculated in the page speed part of the algorithm, essentially?
No, it just literally just doesn't fetch them.
Just don't
for
even
rendering,
crawl it.
Doesn't get it, crawl it, no, nothing. We just don't download them. We save bandwidth.
I see. Okay. What about? I was analyzing a client's page today. They had like 5 animated GIFs that were like all 5 megabytes each or something. Does Google must look at those when you crawl, right? Because or not always.
Well, I mean, like we fetch them. And you probably want to find a way to not do that. But
I'm trying to urge them to do animated MP4s or autoplay MP4s.
There's like many case studies that show that that's a much better strategy. Right. Like GIFs should not be used for this. Yeah. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. Okay. Like the bandwidth, the amount of data that we pull is not that. And especially with images, they're kind of like download asynchronously anyways. So. Yeah.
Okay. Great. We have another question from Edward Bate about page speed. He says, do you think that stripping out unused code, so I run into this all the time, I'm just going to sum up his question. So you run Lighthouse, you go to network conditions, and you look at the JavaScript profile, you look at the percentage of JavaScript that is not being used on that page. Yeah. Lots of times it's like 80%, 90%, etc. Is cleaning up that code, removing instances where JavaScript is not being used, is that helpful, number one? And second, in a practical sense, a lot of times, especially on a CMS that's pre-built or something, you see a bit of JavaScript code where it's not all used on every page. So how can you handle a situation like that?
So that's a good one. So yes, obviously, shipping less data over the wire is always beneficial for the user, for us, for everyone. If you know that you have unused code, why are you transferring it to the browser? That's such a pointless gesture. And don't forget that a bunch of people are on like metered connections, right? If I'm on a mobile phone abroad, then I might want to watch every megabyte that I download. And if you ship me 4 megabytes of unused code that you're then not going to use, then I'm going to be pretty pissed about that. Yeah.
I think from a practical standpoint, so I'm not a developer, and many of the listeners are not a developer, so when we encounter so I had a client, they're on WordPress, and they see this JavaScript file that's just a part of the theme, but it's not all being used on every page. Is there a technical way to solve for that?
So I'm not sure about the CMSs because I have tried to stay clear of that because it makes things easier, but not always, right? And it does make a few things harder, especially with WordPress and other CMSs that are having like plenty of plugins. It really depends on the plugins that you're using. If they ship you dead code, then that's a bad plugin.
Okay. Get a different plugin.
Probably, or at least like talk to the plugin vendor, like why is this here? You should have a build process that removes this.
Yeah.
If it's a custom built site, you can use Treeshaking and a bunch of optimizer tools that are basically like shaking off the bits and pieces that you don't need.
Is Treeshaking like a development term, or?
Yeah, that's a development term. The idea being you basically, let's say like you have a library like jQuery. jQuery has a bazillion functions that it has on offer. If you're using it to just, I don't know, address something on the page and make it fade in and fade out, then you don't need the bazillion things that are in jQuery. You just need that one module, and maybe it has dependencies that it needs to do what it does. And then what you can do is, as part of your build process, you can statically analyze the dependency tree for that and figure out, okay, so I need these 10 functions to make this one function that the page actually uses happen, and then throw away everything else. You're literally shaking everything off that tree, and because fundamentally what happens is you parse the JavaScript into a tree of stuff that happens, and then you throw away every dead end that you see where you don't need anymore. Nice. And that's a technique that you can use, and there's like a bunch of tools and plugins for that if you search for tree shaking. With CMSs, that might be harder, but I highly recommend just like checking with your CMS community. Like the WordPress community probably has fantastic answers on that because it is a really popular and successful and great CMS. I just don't know the answer for that specifically now.
Okay. We had some questions, not surprisingly, about React and JavaScript frameworks and SEO. The first one, I'm just wondering if you can, I know you've, at a couple recent conferences, updated people on Google's current capabilities of crawling and rendering JavaScript. I'm wondering if you can update some of the listeners on that to the current state of rendering, that for those that may not have heard that. Sure.
So, I remember like one of the first things that I did when I joined in April last year, 2018, was checking how the different frameworks are working in terms of Google search. Finding out that they pretty much all work well. There's a few like things that you need to take away or take action on. For instance, I remember an old version of Angular had a really weird way of doing links when you use router. That's no longer a problem. React has, that's fine as well, but you need to have like a plugin to deal with meta tags and titles, then that's okay as well. Vue.js, the router by default uses fragment URLs, which is not great for SEO. You want to switch that to history mode. But generally speaking, like the capabilities on our side, we have run the numbers and found out that the queuing time, not the time it takes to render a page, the time it takes between we crawl and process and then actually render, so the time we are waiting for render resources to be available, at median is 5 seconds. For the 90th percentile, that is within minutes. Means sometimes it can take a little longer, but most of the time it doesn't. So that's that.
And I remember at one point it was said there's a second indexing or rendering process, right? And was that something that was confused by the community at the time?
No, that was actually correct. So we do still have a bit of a two-way thing. It's just that pretty much every page that we see for the first time goes through the rendering stage because we don't know if we have to render or not. And you can assume that pretty much everything gets rendered. Okay. So I wouldn't worry too much about the two waves of indexing, and there is not, like, people were like, oh yeah, there's a month delay in between, and I'm like, nope, that's not true. And the reason is, so what we realized, I've been talking to a bunch of people in the community about this, is there is a fundamental misunderstanding of where JavaScript comes into the play. So if I look at a random page of HTML, it might not get indexed, right?
Yeah.
The same goes for JavaScript pages, especially if something goes wrong.
Right.
Then and we don't see any content, then why would we index the page?
And it could be a whole host of reasons.
There's a whole host of reasons. There's a bunch of stuff that can be going on, and I'm trying to figure out why that is that some people are, and I believe them that they are seeing a delay that is longer, but that's not JavaScript rendering that is at fault for this. I am not sure if there's something else in the pipeline that might make decisions based on JavaScript, but as far as I can tell, it's not the rendering that is the issue, and JavaScript might not be the issue either.
Okay.
So for many pages that were shown to me, waving the JavaScript is the culprit here flag, it turned out not to be the case. It has been like either something was injecting a no index and they didn't expect. Can you? Okay, great. Can you close the door? God damn it! Sorry for that.
I can edit.
Fantastic. Like what was that about?
I don't know.
Walking in, standing in the door, and talking to each other. Great, good job.
I think the thing so I catch a lot of this on Twitter when an event is happening. So the initial thing I heard was it's a separate rendering and it takes a week. And so that's part one of the question. And part two is then at the more recent event, I thought I saw some people saying on Twitter, now it's quicker.
Yeah.
And so I just want to confirm or see if that is actually
true. Okay. That's true. It is quicker. And as I said, like for the median, the time on the queue for rendering, which means like between crawling and being rendered, or going into rendering. Let's be very, very careful on how I phrase this. Going into rendering is 5 seconds. For the 90th percentile, that is within minutes. And then rendering takes how long it takes to render your page in Chrome. Right. If your page is done rendering its stuff in a second, then it's going to take us a second. If it's done in 10 seconds, then it's going to take 10 seconds. That's how long the rendering actually takes. It's not that we are like rendering for an hour or something.
So the time in that week or less now, that's waiting in a queue.
Like, yeah.
I see.
That's like
okay, so the rendering is not taking a week.
No,
okay.
It's not. And as I said, like the queue time is really short as well.
There's a queue time for HTML pages too, right? As
sure.
you were saying,
yeah, I mean that's pretty much the crawling queue. So
I see. Okay.
But that's something that I keep seeing where it's like it's hard to diagnose from the outside because you have two spots that you can observe about your pages. You see when your page was crawled because you can observe the server logs, and you see when your page is in the index. In between are so many steps that you cannot see into. And then people jump to the conclusion that if something does not get to the index stage, it must be because of JavaScript.
Right.
To which I say, that's not how this works, because we might decide in the middle, oh, we don't want to index this, or this is too close to something else, or we deduplicate it because it's like similar to a piece of content that we already seen somewhere else, or we just don't find it good enough to be in the index. There's many, many different reasons for something to not end up in the index, and most of the times when people are like, but this page took a week to update, then I'm like, yeah, because it only gets crawled once a week.
Yeah, you see that with HTML pages too.
Yeah, it happens with HTML pages too. This is not special to JavaScript, and there might be something. So I keep hearing about people saying like, but in our data it looks different, and I want to talk to these people because I want to see how they gather this data, and I will talk to these people next week as well to figure out like where does this come from, because I believe what they are seeing. Why would they lie? There's no reason to lie. It's just that I think the conclusion that JavaScript is the culprit is not necessarily true. It's definitely not rendering. If it's JavaScript, it's in some other process stage, but I wouldn't be aware of another process stage that is influenced or involved with JavaScript. So we'll see.
And we'll come back to a little bit more crawling stuff, but I just want to know if you can briefly explain, what does it mean when Googlebot is now evergreen?
What that means is that in the rendering stage, we are using the current stable version of Chromium to render. Beforehand, we rendered with Chrome 41.
Which was very outdated.
That's pretty outdated.
Yeah.
Doesn't have a bunch of features, so that means like if you were using modern features for loading or displaying critical content, you might end up not getting that content into search, and you had to take extra steps. Yeah. We don't want you to take extra steps. We want our stuff to just work with what you put in front of the user. So this is like a huge leap forward in the sense of performance improvements, but also being able to render more sites on more pages. And also just rendering more stuff that has modern features, which is amazing.
That's great. So I wanted to start a little bit at a clean slate scenario. So if a company or organization they're going to build a website, and they're what would be the reasons why you would choose to go with a JavaScript framework over a traditional CMS or database-driven HTML server-side site?
These two things do not exclude each other. I think like JavaScript or not is already the wrong question. The question is, how do you architect your page? And that depends highly on the nature of your page.
And is that the case even if you're using a JavaScript framework?
Sure.
Okay.
So JavaScript frameworks bring a bunch of stuff that is mostly useful for interactive web applications. And I say web applications very specifically. I know that the definition is very vague and means a lot of different things. But if you have something like, I don't know, a social network or a news site with lots of interaction features and stuff that needs to be like, state that needs to be kept, let's say. Like, for instance, I log in and I have a level and I have points, and if I interact somewhere on the page, my points go up and stuff like that, then that's a lot of interaction that is very hard to get right with a server-based system, where you would have to always transfer the data back and then get the data back in. And if the data shows up on multiple places, then you might have like discrepancies, where you might know this, like there's a bunch of websites that struggle with this. You have like a little notification icon that says you have one more notification. You click on it, you see the notification, but the notification icon still says 1. And you go to some other screen and it still says 1. And you go back to notifications and you see like, no, there is not another notification. That was the notification I already saw. These kind of things, these state management things, is where frameworks usually really shine. And they also bring you like a bunch of architecture decisions that you don't have to make. But they are meant for these very interactive websites. A marketing page, a blog, all these things are not very interactive.
I think that's what a lot of people say. Critical content, main menus, navigation, etc. should not be, or it's less efficient to be in the JavaScript.
I mean, it depends on how you use your JavaScript, right? If you use it, server-side render it, and hydrate the more interactive functionality afterwards, that is fine, because then you have the content is in the static part that comes in first, and then you upgrade it. That is also very hard to build, and that's like might be a burden that your development team is not willing or able to take. If I am a small company with 2 developers working on this, I might not want to put this burden on them. I'd rather maybe scale down on interactivity and say like, let's go with something server-side and something classic.
And I'm also thinking long term too, does it really make sense to build all this stuff that in JavaScript that doesn't need to be, and then go through all the effort to make it accessible?
No, absolutely not. If you have no good reason to build it in JavaScript, don't build it in JavaScript.
Also, just wondering if you can clarify, so I hear 3 things: hybrid rendering, dynamic rendering, and pre-rendering. I'm aware of the nuances, but I was hoping you could just explain quickly to the audience what those 3 different things are. Right.
There's actually, I'm not sure which, like you said, hybrid rendering, dynamic rendering, and pre-rendering. There's also server-side rendering,
and client-side,
and then there's also client-side rendering. So server-side rendering means you run whatever code, in this case JavaScript, on the server. So like a request comes in, you run the JavaScript, that generates the HTML on the fly and sends that back. That's server-side rendering. Now you might find that you don't have to, so this incurs a bunch of problems because the JavaScript has to run on every request, which means this might probably actually be very slow because it has to generate the HTML. But if this is, let's say, like a blog, where the only change that ever happens is when I update or delete or create a new blog post, then I know when the content changes. There's very specific moments in time when the content changes. And I have to publish my content somehow, right? Let's say like I write on my computer and then I upload it somehow on my server, and then on my server it gets served. What I could do is pre-rendering, where I'm basically saying like, okay, I know this has changed now, and instead of just uploading to my server, I take whatever data I'm creating. For instance, my blog is one of these cases where I'm pre-render. I have a markdown file that is just very raw formatting, and then I have some HTML template, and I use some JavaScript. Whenever I publish, some JavaScript runs that takes the markdown, produces the HTML and uploads that HTML. So the HTML is not constantly regenerated because that's pointless, because there's no change in the HTML unless I publish a new post or change an existing one. So that's pre-rendering. Pre-rendering means server-side rendering that you do very rarely, and you basically create a static page that you then serve. So the rendering and the serving is separate. Server-side rendering, in contrast, again, renders every time it has to serve. And then there's hybrid rendering, which we retired as a phrase because it confuses people.
Yes.
We do no longer use hybrid rendering. What we meant with that, what I meant with it, I'm the one who coined that term, and I'm the one who's wrong about it here. What I meant when I coined the term hybrid rendering is server-side rendering plus hydration, which means you pre-render or you server-side render, doesn't really matter, but like you create some form of static HTML that you ship, and then you load the JavaScript on top of it. What does that mean, and what does that bring you? Well, it means that you get the content really quickly into the browser, and then optionally and possibly, if things go right, if the stars align, your JavaScript kicks in and gives you all the interaction features that you might need, like, I don't know, loads additional content, as in like comments, or loads like the little like button that you can press and has a nice anime, I don't know. Like all this kind of stuff basically will be built on top of the static content that was sent to the server.
I see.
And then there's dynamic rendering, which is different from all of these. Dynamic rendering means your server makes a distinction. Your server looks at the user agent and goes like, oh, this is a crawler or a bot, versus this is a user. If it's a user, it just sends whatever is there, like most likely a client-side rendered application. But if there's a bot that might not be able or willing to run the JavaScript, it sends it a server-side rendered or somehow pre-rendered version of it, or maybe pre-renders on the spot, who knows. Like it basically creates static HTML for the crawlers only, so it does like a split. And then there's client-side rendering, where you basically ship the HTML skeleton into the browser, and then the JavaScript does everything, like fetches stuff from the network and constructs the actual content.
Yeah, we had a client that had like 50,000 products all being client-side rendered, got them to do dynamic rendering. Not only were they all actually indexed, which they weren't before, and that maybe that's one of those things we could talk about. Maybe it wasn't the JavaScript that was causing the no indexing. It certainly looks that way because now it is indexed with that change, but also their traffic numbers are way, way, way up because all those individual products are now able to be found. So that's to me was a great application of the hybrid render, or not the dynamic
rendering. But saying that, see, that's the thing. I would have argued if you have the opportunity to invest into server-side rendering or server-side rendering and hydration, do that rather than dynamic rendering. Because rendering 50,000 products in the client is probably going to be really slow, especially on mobile. Right. So this is not good for the user either.
So to speed up,
why would you only serve the user the better version, so to speak? Right?
I see.
Dynamic rendering is a workaround. It's not a long-term strategy. We hope that it goes away and dies in a fire, but at this point we still have to have it around because there's still many people stuck with a client-side rendered application that they are not happy with, but they can't move away from it. Also, obviously, the goal is to eventually make client-side rendering so efficient that it just works. Right. But I'm not sure which one's going to come first, to be honest. And that's inherent in the technology as well. JavaScript just needs to be downloaded and parsed and executed as a whole bundle, whereas HTML can be parsed as it arrives. It's going to be faster anyway.
I see.
So yeah, but yeah, that's...
So I had a couple questions that are just about general JavaScript testing. And in fact, you helped me on Twitter a little while ago. I was asking about how to know if something is set up correctly, and you shared a method for doing that in Chrome. I'm wondering if you can share that for the listeners. So this is basically a way to take a page that's being dynamically rendered and test and make sure that it's accessible to Google and that the content is accessible.
Right. What did I tell you?
You told me to switch my user agent, open view source essentially, and look at it that way. So is that still a good method?
Yeah, I mean, it depends as usual. So it depends on the setup. So generally speaking, if it's a normal or quote-unquote naive dynamic rendering setup, then that absolutely works. However, some people might be like, hey, hold on, this costs me money because I have to pre-render this. I don't want anyone to just pretend that they're a Googlebot and then I ship the pre-rendered version to them. So they might do like a reverse DNS lookup, and then switching the user agent would not work.
Okay.
But what you can always do is you can always use the rich results test or the mobile friendly test or the inspect URL, depending on what is available to you, and look at the rendered HTML. That's definitely what we're going to see and use in indexing.
I saw, Jamie Alberico, she asked on Twitter the other day, and I was wondering this too, when you do the inspect URL, I believe in Search Console, I think the screenshot is only what you see above the fold.
Yeah,
there's no way
screenshot.
Okay, so you're saying look at the code itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
The screenshot is just a nice visual indication if things might go wrong, but if the content you care about is not on the screenshot, just ignore that and look straight into the HTML.
Okay, and I think her question was why you can't see the screenshot below the fold, but you're saying this screenshot's not really
the screenshot is not even used in indexing. Like the screenshot means nothing to us. We just provide it as a preview kind of thing.
I see.
And there's like a bunch of reasons why we don't show you what is below the content, below the fold. One is literally just the design of the entire testing tool would break that way. The other thing is it might take us a lot longer to actually get the data because creating the screenshot is quite expensive.
Yeah, I always wonder that myself too. Let's see, I got a couple other JavaScript questions. I'm seeing if any of these don't touch upon what we talked about earlier. Let's switch to crawling. I had a couple crawl questions. So I actually saw a quote, I think somebody was quoting you at a recent presentation that says rendering counts against crawl budget.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could expand upon that quote.
Sure. So assuming that you have a website that is entirely server-side rendered, and what it does is it displays 100 images, right? And then you have a page for each. Let's say like these images are products, and then if you click on a link, you see that specific product as a detail page.
Yeah.
So what we are having here, let's also say that there's like a bunch of JavaScript that is shared across all pages and a bunch of CSS that is shared about all the pages. So we come to the home page, we come to the products overview category, whatever you want to call it. We download that's one request. We download the CSS, we download the JavaScript, and then we download the hundreds of the 100 images that we're going to display on that page for each of the products. So that's 103 requests at this point, right?
All those they're basically URLs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Resources on the page. So we downloaded all the images for the page, we downloaded the JavaScript, the CSS. Now we we would basically try to index one of the product detail pages. So we would go and fetch that, 104, request number 104. Then we see the JavaScript, we have that already, we take it from the cache, does not count against your crawl budget. We would check the CSS, it's the same, so we would also take it from the cache. We would see the image for the product, we would see it from the cache. So that's it, right?
Yeah.
However, let's imagine that you do not server-side render. Now what happens is we load the page, one request against your crawl budget. We load the CSS, second request. We load the JavaScript, third request. The JavaScript makes an API call, fourth request, that fetches the list of products. For some reason, your API is badly designed and only gives an ID, like a bunch of, let's say, like 100 IDs. So now for each of these IDs, it makes another request. That's another 100 requests going right there. So we are at 104 at this point. Now that we have 104 requests made, we also get the images for these products. So that's another 100 requests. So now we're at 204 requests, and we haven't even looked at a product detail page yet.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. When we render and JavaScript makes any sort of resource request directly or indirectly, and when I say directly, I mean like you use XHR or you use fetch, you basically make a network request to an API or whatever. Or if indirectly, like it creates an image in the content, then it has to download that image. If it adds a style sheet, it has to download that style sheet. If it loads more JavaScript, it has to load that JavaScript.
Right.
Each of these requests do count against your crawl budget unless we have things in the cache. But yeah, that's the thing.
So one thing I've heard a lot of SEOs talk about a lot is this idea of crawl budget. I think in theory it makes sense to optimize for crawl efficiency. And so it sounds like there is this idea of trying to improve the ability to that which Googlebot can crawl your content. Would you say that's generally something people should be trying to do, and I'm not talking about like a 200-page little website. I'm thinking of like thousands, 5, 6, 7 figures of pages.
Yeah, if you have like millions of URLs or hundreds of thousands of URLs, you probably want to do that. Yes.
Because I'll go into logs and I'll see Googlebot crawling calendar URLs like over and over and over again. I know sometimes we hear things like, it's okay, don't worry about it. But it seems like if it's something you can optimize for, you might as well.
Sure. Generally speaking, like you shouldn't worry about it until it becomes a problem.
Okay.
And you know if it's a problem if you like have new content and it just does not get crawled. If you like discovered not crawled yet in Search Console, that's a hint that there is
a crawl
limitation of the probably the crawl budget.
And what about crawled but not indexed? Is that also indicate, or is that maybe a content issue?
That's a content issue. Okay. That's us. So crawled but not indexed basically tells us either you told us not to index this page on one way or the other, or we just didn't think that we need to put it in the index.
Right, for
whatever reason.
Okay. Got a great question from Victor Pan. I don't know if you know Victor. I believe he's in the Boston area. Yeah. He says he has a blog with 10,000 blog posts. Which of the following pagination strategies would use the least crawl budget? Number 1, canonical paginations to view all. 2, infinite scroll. And 3, give it the rel author treatment, meaning ignore it. That's a joke in the third one. Or maybe option D if he didn't put what you would recommend.
So the option is to canonicalize towards a view all, or I would probably say either way. Like either use a canonicalization or you don't even have to canonicalize. You just have to have a page that has all the URLs, or even use a sitemap. It doesn't matter that much. I would say like pagination is probably the option 1 or 2. It's probably the best to do. You can also just like use normal pagination and have like links for each page. That's also fine. Yeah, that doesn't matter as much.
I often recommend on desktop to not use infinite scroll. Never mind, because it's a terrible UX experience.
Yeah, for infinite scroll, you have to be very, very careful. You want to make that a very have a fallback that does not use scrolling.
So the bot can access that content, right? Because that's the type of content that can be problematic.
You want to expose that as URLs, and with infinite scrolling, that's quite tricky.
Okay. SEO Toddler wants to know, they use a fold-out mega menu in their shop, internally linking to all category pages. Are those internal links in the menu considered to be the same, I'll take whatever he means by that, as normal internal links in the main content of a page for crawler and page hierarchy?
I don't understand the question.
So I think, the same meaning. So they have links that are behind a click, right? Is what it sounds like. So I think he wants to know by maybe crawl queuing or where the link is in the page hierarchy. Are they counted the same as a link that is not behind a user click?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. We'll move on. So Prashantha, I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly or his name correctly, wants to know, when we observed our server log file, we found that many Googlebot hits for like ID URLs, like update stats, $NID equals 9865. I don't know if that's like a CMS thing or unique to their site. Is blocking URLs like that in robust.txt kind of the best method to improve for crawl efficiency?
I mean, if these URLs are useless, yeah. Just be very, very careful to not accidentally block URLs that you don't want on the list. Right. And especially with parameters, that can be a little tricky.
Yeah. Also, when I run into this with clients and that content is all indexed, I usually have them no index first.
Yeah, no index is probably a better strategy, and then maybe block it in robots.txt if you need to.
I think I heard lately too, a no index may influence the bot to crawl that page less at some point.
Yeah.
Okay. So even a no index might be the first step, so you can check with a site search. And then the same person wants to know, they have used a crawl delay on their website. Would it affect Googlebot crawling and rendering rate? So they have crawl delay 10 hash CSS JS images.
I don't think we support crawl delay in robots.txt.
Okay, I didn't think so either.
If it's in our docs, then yes, we do. If it's not in our docs, then probably not.
And is that a good rule of thumb in general to know if it's supported?
Generally, that's true, yeah.
So I've got a couple questions. I'm going to go a little quick hit here. Got a couple questions on indexing, kind of content-related things. So this relates to a little bit what you said earlier about Google being slow indexing or no indexing content. So Christian says, Google seems to be really slow at removing old URLs from the index. When they're doing a site search, they still see the URLs there. Stuff they've 301'd ages ago, whatever that means, maybe weeks or months, is lingering for weeks. So is that a problem? And then is there a way to get Google to no index that content faster?
So first things first, the site search operator is bypassing a lot of the actual indexing logic. And also you have to understand the index cares about quick adding and reading. If you look at data structures, there's no data structure that is really fast at scale for all of the operations, right? And there's like a bunch of operations that you can have. Create, read, update, delete are normally like the things that you have as operations on a piece of data. And if you have lots of data, you have to decide which of these operations you want to be fast. Delete doesn't have to be fast. We don't care because we can mark things in the index as do not show this to people and just like delete it whenever you have time for deleting it. We want reading to be fast because we want to show results fast. Yes. We want inserting to be fast because we're going to insert lots of stuff.
And inserting means?
As in like adding a new record in the database.
I see.
Updating might be fast, might not be fast because basically updating is a special case of adding something to the database, so to speak. Deleting is not something that we care about being fast. And you should not care about that either, because being in the index does not mean that we show that to users.
Right.
That's two different things.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, if you have no indexed something and we just happen to still have it in site search, that doesn't mean that it's shown to users. Right? That just means we have it in the index and it will eventually be deleted. Yeah. That's a question that we get oftentimes, especially when it comes to like hacked sites. They're like, but I removed all this, and we're like, and we don't show it to users either, and you don't get a penalty for this. This just lingers because we just need some more time to delete it. So I wouldn't worry about that.
And I want to remind listeners, I just use the URL removal tool for a client. And it actually, is that going away?
No. It's just, it doesn't do what you think it does, I think.
Well, no, it doesn't remove from the index,
Yes.
but they had a legal situation where they couldn't have this result show in Google. So it's a temporary, artificial,
Exactly. It removes it from serving.
Right.
Like it doesn't display
the
the thing, but it stays in the index because we can't just delete that quickly from the index, I think.
Yeah, so I just want to remind the listeners that if it's a visual serving they want to fix for a legal reason or something, that's
then they know index and maybe for that page, but also like just use the URL removal tool to not make it show up.
So I'm wondering what the shadow DOM is. I think I saw that mentioned at a talk you gave. It looked interesting.
Okay, are you aware of web components?
A little. I mean, maybe
cool.
you could refresh me and the listeners on that a little bit.
So web components, the idea was that the industry is moving quite fast when it comes to like new UI elements and stuff like that, and standardization for these usually takes quite a long time until every browser supports them or can support them. And the idea was to there's like a thing called the Extensible Web Manifesto that wants browsers to expose a lot of the internal primitives so that web developers can build upon them and eventually, hypothetically, if this is successful and great, it might move into the browser standards. However, that needed to be built. So we wanted a way to create new web elements, HTML elements basically, to say like, I want a tab box, I want a carousel, I want HTML elements to do all sorts of stuff, visual or non-visual. Like I might want HTML component that loads a specific website, or just imagine having like a GA-tracker as an HTML tag you just drop on your page and then Google Analytics just works, right? That's what web components are. The idea is to just like, we figured out as developers, if we build complex applications, we want to build them out of individual elements that we can compose and build, like basically Lego bricks for web developers. That's what it is. And there's a bunch of standards that allow us to do this. One of the more simpler to use ones are the HTML templates. It's an element, it's an HTML tag that is called template, and whatever you put in there is basically inert and doesn't actually get evaluated until you use it, and then you can basically use that as a stamp and like basically just clone it into the document as many times as you need. Like I can have a template that has a list item and an image and a headline and some description text, and I can just use that template and fill it with data for every product that I load from a backend or whatever. So that's one standard. The other thing is called custom elements. That allows me to actually say, hey browser, there's this new element that's called GA-tracker, and I want you to run this JavaScript when I'm using it in the HTML. That allows us to create new HTML tags. But now there's one more problem. In CSS and JavaScript, you can go throughout the entire document and say like, give me all images. The problem is that from a developer's perspective, the image inside my, I don't know, product tile element or component is not an image that I want to show up in that case, because it's internals of that component, and I only want the images that I put there, not the images that the developer that created this component put there. So there's no mechanism to prevent that from happening, because it's basically one huge tree. So you have the body, and then inside the body you have pretty much everything like that has like the first level children, and these children can have more children, and so on and so forth. Like an H1 element has a child of a text node where the text lives, all that kind of stuff. And you can only query the entire tree. So you might actually accidentally go inside the internals of components. Imagine it as like a McDonald's restaurant. When you say like, I don't know, everyone wearing green shirts, you probably mean everyone you can see in the guest room, not everyone who's working in the kitchen. So to prevent this kind of accidental querying or accidental touching, there's an API and a standard called Shadow DOM that allows you to basically draw a border around the part of the tree, and normally that is within the component. So like I have a component that renders a product on my product list, and it has an image and it has a text and a link. I want these three things to be isolated. So I say like, I have my little Shadow DOM here, which is the same kind of tree that the rest of the document has, but this is isolated from the outside. So CSS doesn't style it unless I allow it to style it, and JavaScript doesn't touch it unless I allow it to touch it. So that's where Shadow DOM comes in.
And is the whole reason for this to make it more efficient, to make the site more efficient?
One thing also to just like make components work properly. Just imagine, why don't you have the entrance into McDonald's in the kitchen so that you don't accidentally walk into things that you probably don't want to see? Or that you probably shouldn't be messing with. Just imagine every guest coming in from the kitchen through a restaurant, then you'd be like, I'm not sure if I'm going to trust the food that I'm being served, because anyone could have just like touched it or spat on it. So that's just like a way to isolate the internal workings of these components from the outside world.
As an SEO, is there a problem I might see auditing a website that would then cue me to say, oh, let me tell you what Shadow DOM is?
Probably.
Okay.
What might happen if they are using web components in some form or another is when these web components are not built well, then they might not work well with what's called light DOM. I know this is confusing. So like, imagine you have a div element, right? And you can nest anything into it, and then the text shows up. Right? But what if I put some text into my product tile element? Well, I don't know. Because if this product tile element does something that says like, oh yeah, basically the default is throw everything away and display what I have in the Shadow DOM, then you're just going to be seeing whatever this component wants you to see, which is great. The problem is that you might now end up with content inside your document that does not show up because the web component overrides it. So if that happens, if you see like, why is this content not showing up? Why am I only seeing this other content here? The content might, especially if it's a web component, might come from a Shadow DOM. And then you need to figure out how to get the Shadow DOM to import whatever is the child of the component that you want to show up there. There's documentation for that explains it in much more detail and much better.
I see. We're going to do two more quick questions and wrap it up on the hour. One is just Drew has a general question about what's a really good report, or what would be a really critical issue to look for in Search Console? You know, there's a lot going on there. You're moving new things. I know it's a very open question. I have certain things I like to look for as a consultant, but I mean, is there any particular tool that you would favor over another in there?
Depends. It really depends. No, it's true. Like fundamentally, one thing that I would like people to do more is not to go from the issues. I mean, like it's sounds kind of like the right thing to do, to start from the errors, but I would start the other way around. I would try to figure out what are the URLs that we really care about, and making sure that they are covered, they are indexed, and they are showing up, and they are performing. And only then, if you see like, hold on, this very important product is actually missing. Why is that? Then you find that out either through the URL inspection tool, or you go straight into the error report and look there, because we report errors on the basis of like, this might be a problem, but that doesn't mean that it is a problem. Like a soft 404 might be a problem, it might not be a problem. An actual 404 might be a problem, it might not be a problem. If someone links to some random stupid URL that you don't care about, then you're like, well, there's not much, like, this is a 404, there you go. There's not, I can't fix this because it's not broken. It's just an observation that we make. We can't make that judgment call for you, so that's why we're listing it, right? Because what if we don't show you that thing and then you actually cared about that URL, then that's an issue. So
it's flipping around the question a little, because when I do audits, and I'm going from the business and the marketing goals, and then, oh, you don't care about your blog right now? I'm going to ignore most of those errors, for example.
That's perfectly fine, and I would not start with the errors. I would start with what is indexed, and is there something missing that I care about?
Right. And then I wanted to chat just for a minute or two on us as SEOs, working with developers. I know this is something you've talked about a bit, and that's part of your role. There's a lot of information out there about how to work with them, communicate with them, but the biggest thing I wanted to ask was prioritization. So when I work with companies, especially bigger ones, they might agree to do something and they might understand and say yes during the meeting, but then it ends up in a ticketing system or their queue, and you look back 6 months later and it's not done. So I'm wondering how to communicate with developers that shows a level of prioritization around that compared to all of the other tasks that they have.
Yeah, the thing is, like, most of the companies that I worked in and most of the companies I've seen, it's not a developer issue, because developers have priority. Like, we usually have intrinsic priorities that usually get ignored, great. But we also have priorities that are coming from elsewhere. And then the problem is, if there is no good company structure, then they come from everywhere, which means they come from nowhere. As in, like, if everything is priority one, then what does that mean? It means nothing. Then I can literally just roll a dice and see like what comes out of it, which is dangerous, because one, that tells me that the other people don't know what is important. So how am I supposed to know what's important if you don't know, right? If no one in the company knows what is important, and when I say no one knows it's important, then if everyone yells this is important, then again, nothing is. And importance means there must be a list from 1 to, I don't know, 5, what are we gonna be working on, or maybe to 10, whatever. Like, it needs to be ranked. If it's not ranked, it means it's equal opportunity and I get to pick. If you let me pick, I pick whatever is most interesting, probably. Other people might pick what is easiest or most predictable. Depends on the personal preference. But if you're not giving me any signal, it's like ranking really in the search engine. If you don't give me any signals, I'm gonna make any arbitrary pick that I want. So what you need to do is you need to talk to them and figure out how the prioritization is done. Red flags are when they say there's no prioritization, or like whatever the CEO needs today, then that means like there is no prioritization, and there's a more fundamental problem in the organization that needs to be addressed. If there is prioritization and there is somehow some way to get into the stream, and that might look very different depending on the team that you're working with. Scrum teams might do it during backlog grooming, and you might have to talk to the PO for this. Sometimes they do it by basically just talking things through from the backlog. You want to be in the meeting where they talk things through, so you can make the case for what you're doing. Sometimes you need to talk to the business people. Sometimes you just need to make sure that they understand that this needs to be addressed, and no, the new feature that you want is not as important because we are literally not making any money right now. So that's definitely like, try to find out what is the stream of prioritization and get it in that stream. Do not try to create a second stream, because everyone does that, and it never works.
Yeah, I worked with a company that literally the thing that got done was whatever was most recent in Slack.
Yeah, that does happen. If there's no proper structure, then that's what happens. And then you can game that by basically just reposting it every 10 minutes to make sure that it's the most recent thing.
And I think there's an instance when an SEO is in a meeting with a decision maker, like a CEO or a VP of marketing, and a developer. I present the SEO presents something, and then the developer says, well, no, this is why we don't want to do that. How can an SEO try to bridge that communication gap in that instance where everyone's in the same room, but the developer's saying to the CEO or decision maker, no, we don't need that.
No, we don't do that. Okay. If that happens, what you should be doing is, first things first, work with the developers to figure out, like, there's like this quadrant thing, right? There are the things that are easy to do and have very low impact. There's the easy to do high impact. There's the hard to do low impact. There's the easy to do low impact, easy to do high impact, hard to do low impact, hard to do high impact. That's what I wanted to say.
Yep.
So you want to try to figure out what is the criteria that developers are using to make the decision what goes in which quadrant? And then augment that. Okay. Basically say, like, look, fundamentally you want your salary to be paid. That's the same goal that I have as well. I would like my salary to be paid. For our salaries to be paid, the company needs to make money. Yeah. We are making half of our money off of things showing up in search results. This is not showing up in search results. That is a problem. Right. And then basically try to figure out if they are like, oh yeah, but implementing, I don't know, like implementing a sitemap is really hard right now. And then you're like, okay, maybe like, I mean, our content gets discovered. It just doesn't get indexed. So like this is low impact, high effort. So that's a bad quadrant to be in.
Yes.
So maybe instead of that, we can address, like, can we maybe debug why this is no indexed? Or why what's happening here? Why is the content not showing in rendered HTML?
I think sometimes you get a developer that will actually disagree with an SEO about something having to do with SEO. Where an example, like a developer at a client saying, well, yeah, we can add an additional internal linking if you want us to, but I don't think that's going to help.
Then ask them what's the holdup.
Yeah.
If you can do it, why aren't you?
They just don't want to.
Well, then suck it up, Buttercup. This is a job, not your hobby. Sometimes you have to kick them in the butt. But honestly, let me be the devil's advocate for the developers here. Yes. Oftentimes, SEOs come in with absolute bonkers requests that have no bearing on anything, and I know they don't. Like, oh my God, we have this duplicate content here. That's why we're getting penalized by Google. And I'm like, no, we're not. It's just like, this gets canonicalized away, whatever. Like, it's unfortunate, but cleaning all this up is going to take us like a week. And we need this week to do something more important or more fundamental for this. And then there's like a huge debate, and or I don't know, like just like, oh, we can't use JavaScript. We have to undo everything we built because JavaScript is the devil. That also isn't helping, right?
Yeah.
So
try to be a better SEO.
try to figure out what really has impact and back that up with facts and data.
Yeah.
And especially, don't try to be fancy about things. Just try to like get the basics right and let the search engines do the rest, really.
Yeah.
And when I say the basics, I mean like make sure that stuff gets indexed, make sure that stuff is crawlable, make sure that the servers don't fall over every now and then. Yeah.
That's great. So we can wrap things up. I begin all SEO training sessions or speaking sessions by telling them about the duplicate content penalty myth. I try to do my part, but I still hear people all the time mentioning duplicate content. Everyone's scared of it for some reason. I hear that a lot in the ecosystem from clients. So it's good to try to reinforce the opposite. Yeah. Well, Martin, thank you so much. This has been a real delight to have you on the show. And thanks everyone for listening to episode 112 of Experts on the Wire.